Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The regular season's over. What are we going to do in like a month and a half when the actual season's over? I don't know, but we'll figure that out when we get there. Welcome back to Off the Bench. I'm Brandon Carney alongside Pat Gustafson. And for those of you with us live, you will notice Pat has a slightly different background. Pat has been evicted from his house and is now somewhere. No, that's not actually what's going on. But
no,
Pat,
yeah,
where
I
you
am.
at here?
I'm at my friend's house who is not here. I believe he's listening. I'm just keeping his wife company. Wink.
Oh dear.
And for those of you who watch or listen regularly, you know that I do not do the podcast with pants on. So I am sitting in my friend's computer chair while he is not here, without pants on. So sorry.
We're going to need to sterilize that chair at some point.
You might just need a new chair.
Let's waste no time, Pat, because, look, Black Monday is now behind us. As of this recording, Black Monday was yesterday.
Leaked into today, apparently.
Yeah, it did leak into today, and as far as we know, it doesn't seem like the firings are completely over. There's still some things kind of hanging in the universe there, but look, Black Monday itself is behind us. The playoffs are ahead of us, so there's plenty of stuff to talk about. Real quick, Pat, since it was last night and we touched on college football last week, did you catch any of the championship game? I mean, it was a decent game, I thought.
Very little of it. I mean, just a dominant team. Michigan's just a dominant team behind J.J. Garoppolo McCarthy, who is probably going to get an NFL GM fired. Mm-hmm. I heard some talks were like, oh yeah, they could take like J.J. at 6. It's like, at what?
6th
round? What have we learned about these game manager kind of quarterbacks? But that said, he didn't need to do anything. Blake Corum, and they just absolutely dominated. Really rough game for Michael Penix.
Yeah, the exciting guy, from last week that we were like, oh, this guy could end up in the first round now after this performance. He is Simpson memed himself, right in and right out of the first round if he had played himself into the first round, which, I mean, honestly, Pat, as a Patriots fan here, as we sit with the number 3 pick, I plan A for me, I want the Patriots to take a quarterback at 3, but like if we end up taking, Marvin Harrison at 3 and then we can get Penix on the come around, I'll live with that. I mean,
that's the thing is that
game.
They might be able to pull that off. Like, I feel like that might be a more optimal strategy than Jaden Daniels at 3.
Yeah.
But again, time will tell. We've got a lot of time to talk about that. But we got a lot is happening.
Yeah, there is plenty. There will be plenty to talk about, honestly, as soon as the offseason hits. But we've still got plenty of playoffs to go as they kick off this weekend. Honestly, Pat, the biggest thing to come from that national championship game could be the fate of Jim Harbaugh. But we'll have to see what happens with him. Just to kind of get you guys in the loop here. With the fantasy football season fully over, this podcast will obviously look a bit different. We mentioned that in the past. There will still be fantasy football talk when it's relevant. I mean, we'll talk about the fantasy football implications of a lot of these NFL headlines that are going to come out throughout the playoffs and, of course, throughout the coaching cycle and coach hirings and all that stuff. We're going to talk about the Falcons and some very relevant fantasy players here in a little bit, just a tad. And look, but overall, this podcast can absolutely be your source for, covering every NFL rumor, coach hiring, coach firing, all the trade nonsense. We will cover every relevant piece of NFL news all throughout the offseason. And then when that starts to, if that does dry up a little bit, if there's a slower week, we'll dip into some other sports. You've known us if you've been with us for, a year plus now. We love to talk about a little college basketball once March Madness gets here. We'll even dip into, God forbid, some baseball if we have to, because, sometimes it just gets that slow. But Pat's baseball guy. Pat's our baseball guy, so we've got that covered if need be. But yeah, bear with us. Look, I like to think this is always going to be an entertaining show regardless. It's a weird sort of dynamic when we've got to shift from being fantasy football into not fantasy football and then figure out when to put fantasy football back into it. It'll obviously become fully fantasy football again, probably around July. But, until then, it's going to be we can talk about everything NFL, honestly, every sport, whatever we want to do.
And I mean, we're going to be helped by free agency in March, 100%. And then by then also the draft. And obviously, we could look at the draft from a real life standpoint, but also a lot of fantasy implications. Whether you're playing Dynasty or whether you're playing redraft, there's obviously huge ramifications from the draft. So,
yeah,
but, we've got a couple months where we've kind of got to fly by the seat of our pants here, but we'll have the playoffs. We'll have the playoffs to talk about, and we'll probably have some absolutely ridiculous drafts.
Truthfully, there's so much that goes on in the NFL rumor mill during the offseason that will be sustained for a while. I think the only real dead time will be so the draft is, in late April. It'll probably be like second half of May after we're done reacting to the draft, and then the month of June before we really get into, thinking about fantasy football stuff in July and August as we lead into those drafts. But Pat, obviously a lot going on right now that we can talk about. Oh, and by the way, we will not be doing NFL awards. We did our fantasy football awards last show. Real life NFL award picks we'll probably do next week after we get through just the insane news cycle that is hitting us right now, because Black Monday, like I said, is behind us, and we'll start here, Pat. Arthur Smith has been fired, and we can finally rejoice. Our watch has ended. The big bad man is finally gone.
Jeff Fisher is on his ass.
Oh my God. I mean, look, 3 straight 7-10 seasons, which he is nothing if not consistent. But just a pretty rough tenure filled with low light after low light, and not honestly nearly enough highlights to justify keeping him. The Falcons clearly agreed. They wasted no time. They basically fired him at 12:02 a.m. on the East Coast.
They almost didn't even wait.
I mean, I hope Art didn't go to bed. I assume he didn't, or else they would have woken him up out of a dead sleep to be like, hey, buddy, pack your fucking bag. So Arthur Smith is gone. And this whole situation was capped off in, with kind of an exclamation point or a weird little moment here, as he just lashed out at Saints head coach Dennis Allen because the Saints ran up the score at the end of what is now Arthur Smith's last game as an Atlanta Falcon. I mean, we saw the play. We know and by now that it was the players taking matters into their own hands, specifically Jameis Winston going against what Dennis Allen wanted and saying, fuck this, we're getting, Jamal Williams his first touchdown of the year. Hilarious that we're saying that even after he had 17 last year. But, I mean, just seeing Arthur Smith throw a fit was something. What was your reaction to that?
It was nice to see Arthur Smith throw a fit, but at the end of the day, he had a point. He had a point. It's like the other thing is, like, they did not have to line up in victory formation to do that. Yeah. They could have just ran Jameis from under center or the shotgun, gave it to Williams, and scored there. Like, sure, that's running up the score, but I bet you Smith is way less mad about that.
Yeah,
if they do it that way. But we're going to talk about coaches that got fired, and Dennis Allen isn't one of them. But I just think that's very indicative of, I guess, a lack of respect that the players have for him to say no, and for them to just do it and no was the right answer.
Yes.
No from him was the correct answer, but for them to kind of just go behind him and do it anyway, it's like that's not a good, like, either way for Dennis Allen. Either he said do it or don't, and they did it anyway. It's a bad look either way.
Pat, I feel so strongly about Dennis Allen that this is just the next, like, sort of Matt Rule coaching situation where, a couple of years ago we were like, how did you not fire him at the end of the year? Like, what do you guys do? And then they ended up firing him, like, halfway, not even halfway through.
And the
next
other
season.
thing,
that's going to happen to Dennis.
There's a lot of good candidates that we'll talk about. Like, this might be one of the better coaching candidate cycles that we'll get. Like, now's the time if you want to start over. I mean, look at we'll talk about the Titans, but like, the Titans made a questionable decision because they probably thought, like, hey, we're kind of having some doubts, but this is the time to do it. And yeah, Dennis Allen has just shown, like Arthur Smith, to be nothing but mediocre. Nothing but mediocre. The guy's a good defensive coordinator. God, it's been like 10 plus years since he was the Raiders head coach when he was like 35 years old. And that was a terrible decision. I mean, I understand the Saints promoting him, in the stead of Sean Payton, but I truly think that they are making a mistake as well. I think that he needs to go. Like, there are plenty of worse coaches than him, but I feel like you're living between 7 to 9 wins every season under Dennis Allen.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% think that they are going to regret holding on to him. And look, this was a guy that had his name attached to the hot seat like a couple weeks ago or a month or so ago. And what cooled that down, supposedly, is that the Saints finished the season strong. I mean, congratulations. You had back-to-back wins against the Buccaneers and the Falcons. Before that, you lost to the Rams. You beat the Giants and the Panthers. And then before that, you had a 3-game losing streak to the Lions, the Falcons, and the Vikings. Only one of those teams is competent, that being the Lions. Like, I just think it's a team fooling themselves into thinking a guy is going to be able to be more competitive than he actually is next season, and they are going to be staring down the barrel of 3rd or 4th place halfway through next year and realize, all right, we got to can this guy. Because look, this is certainly the optimist in me speaking, and looking at looking optimistically at teams that are kind of going to have a blank slate, one of those being the Falcons with Arthur Smith gone. It's like the Saints sticking where they are, they're probably, I think, going to be looking up at a team like the Falcons, who, as long as they get somebody in there who can somewhat maximize a pretty talented roster, and then you've got the Bucs, who just already beat the Saints in the division this year. There's no reason the Saints won't be, at best third place in that division halfway through next year. Like, the Panthers could still be a disaster, but even the Panthers could end up competitive. Who knows?
In a common theme today with some of these teams are going to be that they just need a quarterback, and the Saints are one of them. Like, Derek Carr, love the dude. It's just not it. Like, his time is kind of passed. Like, he's like a borderline starter in this league right now. And I don't know if Jameis is the answer. I mean, Jameis is a free agent anyway, I believe. So who knows where he'll wind up. But again, you're just kind of replacing a borderline starter with another borderline starter. So I could easily see this team dwelling in mediocrity with Dennis Allen and with a very likely mediocre starting quarterback.
Yeah, they're just in purgatory, and it's the worst place you can be as a team. They don't seem to have any desire to make any true major change this offseason, be it positional or coaching-wise, and I think that is a massive mistake, even in a division that is as easily winnable as the NFC South is. But that's our Dennis Allen tirade, because we kind of expected him to get fired today. But Pat, Arthur Smith obviously being still the headline in this division, this is just, it goes without saying, monumentally good news for Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. Obviously, a lot of their issues still do come with the poor quarterback play. But look, if they're resetting everything, I firmly believe they're going to find somebody who can hold down the quarterback position at least better than Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke.
But obviously, too, we've also seen plenty of productive fantasy players with bad quarterbacks. So. Yeah. But the biggest thing holding them back was still Arthur Smith. Say what you will about Desmond Ridder, he stinks, but a competent coach. And it's so bizarre because Smith was a very competent offensive coordinator in Tennessee. Like, that was his offense. Mike Vrabel, was a defensive guy, so that was his offense. And Derrick Henry was a monster, and they just fed him the ball, and it's just like, yeah, I'm going to feed him the ball too. He is Tyler Algier. Like, it's just so bizarre. And then the guy just wanted to be Bill Belichick so bad. I think I've said that before, that he wanted to be this angry kind of guy who's short with the media and short with fans and whatnot.
You haven't earned that. You have not earned that.
But that's what I'm saying is, like, yeah, like, you aren't that guy. And this is a really attractive spot, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, you've got 3 top 10 picks. Kyle Pitts, possibly the best tight end prospect ever coming out of college, who, has yet to really flourish. Drake London had a good numbers year, but I mean, numbers kind of just pile up at this point. It wasn't a convincing one. I think he broke 1,000 yards. It wasn't convincing, regardless. And then Bijan is also a stud. And they've got a good offensive line. Like, Chris Lindstrom's going to the Pro Bowl. Like, I think this is a really good spot, and I think they can be flexible here. Like, I don't think, like, we're going to talk about how I think some teams more so need a young guy or an offensive coach or a veteran coach. I feel like they could really go in a number of different directions here, and this can work.
Yeah, I would agree. Drake London, just to note, finished at 905 yards this year. Did miss a game, so would have been a little bit closer had he not. But yeah,
but even that is
yeah.
Think about it. From a couple of years ago, that's a standard season. That's a 16-game season.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
and that's just mid.
Yeah, it's just more malpractice by Arthur Smith, and we've made a note specifically in relation to the Falcons that don't always bet on it has to get better, right? With quarterback play, at least, it has to get better coaching-wise. This franchise will not bring in a head coach that is going to give a healthy Bijan Robinson 47% of its team's running back carries. That is what Bijan Robinson is at this season.
And it's, Tyler Allgeier's a good player too,
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, it's like, I understand that if you didn't use the capital that you used on these guys.
Yeah.
Like, if it's a case where, like, hey, they drafted a really good, Bijan in the 5th round, say, a guy like Bijan and everyone wants him, it's like, they don't have a really incentive to use him, but, like, you have an incentive to use this guy.
Yeah.
Like, it was just maddening. And now my question is like, where's Arthur Smith going to go next? Detroit. He's going to be an offensive. He's going to be an offensive coordinator somewhere, and he's shown in the past he can be a damn good one. So it's like, which Arthur Smith are we going to see? Are we going to see the Arthur Smith that led a very balanced, competent Tennessee offense, or are we going to see this curmudgeon who just breeds chaos?
Well, and that's what's confusing, and that's why I'm a little more optimistic about Arthur Smith possibly being an offensive coordinator. Because look, as a Patriots fan, look, as we stand right now with this podcast, Bill Belichick's future is very much up in the air. And a guy who came available today, which we'll talk about in a second, is Mike Vrabel. One thing, a hypothetical somebody floated to me was Mike Vrabel, Patriots head coach. Who's he familiar with? Brings in Arthur Smith as offensive coordinator. Is that reasonable? Yes. Here's my thing with Arthur Smith. I think when he is under sort of the thumb or the head coaching of somebody else, he can't reign as much terror as he did, as he just did in Atlanta. It's like that. Any head coach is going to be like, hey, dumbass, put the good players on the field. Like, I don't think Arthur Smith has regressed as a logical person from his days in Tennessee to Atlanta. I think he is just not equipped to be a head coach. He overthinks things, and if he can settle back in to being an offensive coordinator, he's not necessarily a bad play caller. I mean, a lot of the plays he calls were pretty creative. They were just dialed up for Jonnu Smith and Michael Pruitt. Like, if he has the right guys on the field, he can certainly make that work. So, no,
do we think Jonnu Smith follows him? Wherever he goes, I feel like Jonnu Smith's got to follow him.
He might. Jonnu Smith woke up today just in shambles seeing that Arthur Smith got fired. The only man on the face of the earth.
Man was in hell.
Yeah, about that firing. Yeah, I think, look, Arthur Smith, as much as the doom and gloom scenarios are funny, like about him going to Detroit and, replacing Ben Johnson and ruining what is such a fantasy-friendly cast of guys, I think he'd be okay as an offensive coordinator if that's what he settles on. So it would ultimately be great for the headlines, great for the memes, but not that big of a deal overall. But yes, Arthur Smith out of Atlanta, mercy. Thank you. We are so glad. I think this firmly locks Bijan Robinson in as being, I would take him in the top 5 in fantasy drafts again next year in PPR. Like, we got to see who they bring in, obviously, but this is a guy who's proved in his more limited than it should have been action this year that he is maybe the most electric player on a football field. I think he's more than worth a top 5 pick next year.
And one of the things that made him so useful was his target share. Mm-hmm. That it was if coming away from this year, that's probably what you're going to look at for Bijan and be the most encouraged by. So the kid can catch passes, and some of the moves he puts out there are just insane. So you put a competent head coach where he is the focal point of an offense, I think he's absolutely worth a top 5 pick, especially, with a lot of these guys getting older and some of these guys are going to be in different situations. But just off the top of my head, obviously McCaffrey is the number 1 running back, but I think we're putting Bijan in that conversation for, possibly 3.
Yeah, I think RB2, RB3, honestly, anything after McCaffrey, I think if that is your preference, that is more than reasonable. Like, it's going to be some combination of McCaffrey and then, there's going to be Bijan shortly after, Breece Hall shortly after, like all these guys. But Bijan's absolutely going to be in that conversation, which is refreshing to say considering what we saw this year, which was, a little underwhelming from a production standpoint.
I would say frustrating is the word more so to use, because you see the talent, you see the bursts, but then it's just like, why is this not happening? And especially when we knew it probably was not coming from him. He was not the issue.
And I do want to say this real quick. We talked so much in the preseason about, the draft capital of running backs selected in the top 10 and how they translate to fantasy. For as frustrating as his usage may have been this season, Bijan Robinson finished as RB9. So there you go. Like, this is another thing for those of you who are afraid of, I don't think any running back is going to go in the top 10 this year. But going forward, if a running back is selected in the top 10 in the NFL draft, you can pretty much lock them in for being a top 10 running back in fantasy football, at least their rookie season. Jahmyr Gibbs actually finished as RB10 as well. So just, similar. Trust the rookies. Don't fall into this. I don't trust them just because they're a rookie thing. If anything, you should trust them more, at least in their first year, because teams are going to use them. And even Arthur Smith used him enough to make him an RB1, but hopefully we get RB1 overall Bijan Robinson next year with any luck. Pat, another head coach, and this was probably the most inevitable firing of Black Monday. I mean, even this guy knew, in the weeks leading up to it that he was getting canned. It's Ron Rivera in Washington. They've let him go. His 4 years in Washington, he never finished above 500. He went 7-9, 7-10, 8-1. That season they won the NFC East because this division has been fucking weird in the past. And then this season they bottomed out at 4-13 to the point where they decided to let Riverboat Ron go. Now, what are your thoughts on that, Pat?
Yeah, it's a real shame just because, like, Ron Rivera just seems like one of the best guys in football. Like, cancer survivor, a football lifer. And I think that's the only reason why they didn't can him, say, after week 4, just because of the respect. And I don't necessarily blame him. I mean, the season's lost. You don't want to humiliate a guy like this. But it had to be done. It had to be done. Just such a, I don't even want to say mediocre. I feel like mediocre is too flattering to use for the Commanders the last few years under Ron Rivera. So it's just, and not quite as, because like you've got another big question at quarterback.
Yeah,
a bit of a common theme here with some of these teams is that there's just a huge question mark at quarterback. It's like, who do you bring in to either try and bring something out of Sam Howell, who at his peak could very well be a serviceable quarterback, but at his valleys, a walking turnover.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The biggest thing to note, I think, with Ron Rivera getting fired is the Commanders are taking, this sort of rebuild very seriously, which is not a surprise under new ownership, but it's definitely refreshing for Commanders fans to see. So Josh Harris has hired former Warriors GM Bob Myers, that's right, the Golden State Warriors, and former Vikings GM Rick Spielman to assist with their coaching search. So, this is a situation where they are looking far and wide for solutions, and they are bringing in anybody that they think can provide a valuable opinion in turning this franchise around. And Pat, honestly, when you see this kind of effort, it's hard to think that they're not going to succeed to some degree. It may not be immediate, but the Commanders, now that they are out from under the decrepit and sad and depressing rule of Dan Snyder, I think this is where you start to see things point up a little bit. And I don't know who they're going to get as head coach. I don't know if they're going to be able to, shell out and hit the home run with a guy like Jim Harbaugh, let's say. But either way,
Yeah.
I think they're going to land on somebody who is fit for the job, and they're not going to make the boring move of signing, not that he's even up for a head coaching job, but like a Josh McDaniels-esque hire or a prior, Ron Rivera-esque hire. I think they're either going to go for the big fish like Jim Harbaugh or Bill Belichick if he becomes available, or Mike Vrabel, or they're going to go after one of these hot, young, sexy offensive coordinators, be it Ben Johnson or Bobby Slowick or what have you. I think the Commanders are absolutely heading in the right direction, and I'm very excited to see what move specifically they make now going forward.
It is tough, but like if I probably had to rank the desirability of these coaching positions, obviously the Panthers are in hell. Like they're
no first round pick.
I would say it's either the Commanders or your Patriots. Well, the Patriots aren't even available yet, so yeah, I would say that the Commanders are. I'd probably say the Raiders are probably after the Commanders, but this is probably the second least attractive. So like, it's going to be tough for them to land one of these big guys in terms of Vrabel or Harbaugh because, well, obviously if Harbaugh wants to come to the show, they can go where they want. Like they are basically going to be able to handpick wherever they want to go. And I just really cannot see Washington scoring one of the big fish. Same thing with Ben Johnson. Because even at worst, Ben Johnson could go back to Detroit. I don't think he's going to do it regardless. I think he's going to be a head coach somewhere. But I think you could argue that being the OC in Detroit for another year might be a better play than being the Commanders head coach. So, and obviously they have the number 2 pick, don't they?
Number 2 pick. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, if they want Drake May, they can have him, or they could trade it and, get a boatload, trade with your division pals, the Giants, and get a boatload. So, and it does seem like they're hanging on to their GM. So a bit of continuity here. So
I do think it's a, not totally unattractive job, because anytime you can come in and immediately draft your franchise quarterback as a head coach, like the guy of your choosing, I think there's an attractiveness level to that. One that there isn't as concrete of one, with say the Patriots, if that job does open up, because we've got the 3rd pick. We're sitting there in the top 2 guys who are, as of now, considered to be, a few levels above everybody else. Those guys will in theory be gone by pick number 3. So I don't know. I think the Commanders, from a building your own roster sort of perspective, or at least from investing in the quarterback perspective, it's not a terrible job. But yeah, a guy like Jim Harbaugh, I would expect if he comes to the NFL to target a team more like the Chargers or the Raiders or the Bears, if the Bears decide to move on from Matt Eberflus. As of now, they have not. But yeah, I feel like he would go to a more established franchise. But then again, the Commanders didn't bring in, a guy like Bob Myers, who built a dynasty at Golden State, to not swing for the fences. So I think they will make a play, and who knows? Maybe they knock one out of the park. But for now, this is step one. Ron Rivera is gone, and we will see who ends up filling his shoes. Pat, this one broke just a few hours ago. At one point, we had it as TBD. Shocking, yeah, even though there had been some rumblings. I don't think it was the right move, but Mike Vrabel has been let go in Tennessee. The main logic that we had been hearing was that he and the GM didn't see eye to eye, and that was what led to it, even though Vrabel has, overperformed at times in Tennessee and gotten them to be the number one seed in the AFC just a few years ago. But, then Titans GM Rand Carthon comes out and says he never had any issues with Mike Vrabel and they were on the same page. But Titans owner Amy Adams Strunk essentially said that was why they got rid of him. Part of she had a very long statement on why they got rid of Vrabel, and a lot of it was fluff. But part of what she said was that let me get the quote here exact. Teams positioned for sustained success are those with an aligned and collaborative team across all football functions. So there was some level of dysfunction that implies that stemmed from Mike Vrabel probably not agreeing with someone else in the building, and the logical person that would be the GM. So I don't know if Rand Carthon's just trying to soften the firing because he has obviously has respect for Mike Vrabel still, or what have you. But I think there was some kind of rift there that led to Vrabel being fired. And when that rift happens, when you don't have a coach and a GM that see eye to eye, that can lead to a coach being fired that doesn't otherwise deserve to be fired. And now you've got the hottest name on the free agent market for coaches by far, and that is Mike Vrabel.
I've said time and time again that the Raiders need to hire Antonio Pierce. This is the only other guy in the whole cycle that I would say go for it. Even really? Jim Harbaugh, Ben Johnson. This is the only guy. As a Raider fan, this is the number one guy. If you can get him. But if not, we'll talk about them in a second. But yeah, just kind of bizarre because I kind of thought this would just be a case of him getting poached by the Patriots, and the difference here with Vrabel compared to some of these other coaches that have kind of gotten second chances elsewhere, there are no red flags here.
Right.
The guy's just a really solid coach who has produced really solid defenses, especially front seven. Mike Vrabel's front sevens have been rocks. The last few years. And Tennessee's in a really interesting state where they're probably going to be heading into next year with Will Levis. Derrick Henry is almost certainly out the door.
Yep.
Based on some of his comments post game in the last couple weeks. So I don't know if it's necessarily a bad move because again, if they think that they need to go in a different direction, now's the year to do it because there are a lot of good candidates. But this is a really good coach who I think is going to make a fan base very, very happy wherever he ends up. Which all signs point to the fact that he's going to coach this year. It doesn't seem like he's in a position where he would take a year off or be a defensive coordinator. It's going to be a case where almost maybe not as, prolific and successful as Andy Reid going to Kansas City, but I think it's going to be another situation where maybe it needed to happen, whatever, but another team is going to reap the benefits from this way more than the Titans.
Yeah, I mean, again, I know the NFL is a reactive league, and only a few seasons is what you make a judgment off of. But we're looking at back-to-back years of the Titans going 6-11 and then 7-10. But the year before that, they were 12-5. First place obviously won their division at 12-5, and then they lost the divisional playoffs to the Bengals by a coach of 19-16. Mike Vrabel was coach of the year that season. So it is weird. I look, as a Patriots fan, I was very excited selfishly to see this because now I'm sitting here either we're going to retain Belichick because, again, as of right now, he has not been fired, or if we don't retain Belichick, we're going to get Mike Vrabel. I would be utterly shocked if this coaching job opens up and Mike Vrabel did not fill it.
Exactly, because there's just no way that, one, he wouldn't want it. This is, where he made his name, to succeed. Bill Belichick, for him, obviously we don't know exactly what he's thinking, but you have to think that that's the pipe dream for a former Belichick player there. And he has by far been the most successful, I might be forgetting a name, of a Belichick disciple. There's all this talk about how Belichick disciples flop, but Vrabel has been pretty solid, You look at your boys, Josh McDaniels, Bill O'Brien, Charlie Weiss. Wow, that was going way back. Romeo Crennel. We're digging real deep there, but yeah, I feel like if the Patriots do move on, it's either Bill or Vrabel. And if I'm the Patriots, I move on. because you've got a great opportunity here. Because realistically, how much longer does Bill have there, even if they retain him?
Yeah.
Maybe a few years. But if the team stinks again next year, we're in the same position. I think, the Patriots front office has to attack and has to move on. And honestly, I think that's a good way to segue into just what's going to happen here with Bill Belichick. Like I said, I personally think they should, but it's starting to seem like they might not.
Yeah, it's taken a little bit longer than we expected. He obviously wasn't a part of the Black Monday firings, and as we sit here on Tuesday night, we have not really heard anything new other than that this meeting or multiple meetings with Robert Kraft have taken place. Pat, this was where I landed, after Week 18 wrapped up on the Belichick situation, knowing that this meeting was coming. And I put this out on social media, but I'll just recap it again here. Bill Belichick still has so much left to give as a coach. The players obviously didn't give up on him. He is a defensive mastermind in particular as a coach, and that is something that if the Patriots let him go, I think will be noticeable immediately. I don't think the Patriots defense is going to continue performing the way it has without finding, more talent, because Bill is great at getting just decent players to perform really well. What's up?
Could I interest you in one Matt Patricia?
You cannot. So
can I interest you in one Steven Belichick?
Maybe. Yeah, if Bill Belichick left, you'd feel that impact on the defense immediately because he just gets the most out of his guys. The problem to me that I saw was he's terrible at drafting offensive skill players. And when you don't have a generational quarterback like Tom Brady, that deficiency becomes a lot more obvious. I mean, the last good draft he had for offensive players was 2010 when he drafted Gronk and Aaron Hernandez, RIP, in the same draft. Do you say RIP to a guy who did horrible things? I don't know. We'll move past that. That was the last time.
Instead of just saying RIP, we'll just say he did.
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
Connecticut
so that was the last
legend.
time.
Bristol, Connecticut legend.
True. Yeah, we'll get into
his
that
freaking
another time.
crackpot brother also coached at our high school and is now in some legal trouble. But
just a little. He's throwing rocks at ESPN, whatever. But yeah, that was the last time Belichick drafted good offensive players, and that's a problem when you have quarterbacks that are either mid-tier or below mid-tier. So. My issue that I noticed was that, he's obviously our de facto GM as well, and it's hard to ask a guy, if you want to keep him around as a coach, that, hey, you have to relinquish these GM duties. Now, what surprised me after I put out my whole opinion on social media and all that, there was a little bit of a rumor leak that Belichick would be willing, potentially, to sacrifice some of those responsibilities if that was what he and the Crafts decided was best for the team.
Well, that's the thing. And also, if you're Belichick and you still want to coach and that's what it takes, if Bob Kraft says, hey, you need to loosen up on this, and then, we'll consider keeping you. If that's what he has to do to stay and that's what he wants, then that's what he has to do. And again, it's so hard because this is, probably the greatest coach in NFL history here. This guy has gotten so much out of, sometimes very little besides Tom Brady. But, and it's just kind of a really difficult situation. But again, like I said, you've got your replacement right there for you. You don't have to fuck around with the Josh McDaniels, God forbid, or even Gerard Mayo, who it will be a head coach someday. But you've got Mike Vrabel, a guy that we know will perform, and then also Mike Vrabel, as Gandhi points out, he did not coach under Bill Belichick. He more so played under Bill Belichick, so not technically a disciple, but I kind of consider him one. But I think Mike Vrabel is the way to go if you're the Patriots, but it seems like there's a real possibility that he sticks around, which is wild because weeks ago, it seemed like a sure thing. Even Jay Glazer on Sunday morning reported that he was done. And granted, Jay Glazer does have a bit of a history of being incorrect on some of these things, but he sounded like it was a sure thing.
Yeah, everything was pointing toward Belichick probably being done, and yet the longer this drags out, the more question marks get added to it. And you bring up a good point with if the Patriots were to move on, Mike Vrabel becoming available makes this the perfect time because he's going to go somewhere and probably coach there for a decade, if I had to guess. That's how good of a coach he is. So if the Patriots want to make this move just based on age, then maybe they do it because Belichick may only want to coach the Patriots for another, 3, 4, 5 years max anyway. Look, as of now, I'm glad with how things have panned out for the Patriots. I think they've gone pretty well, and we have a fallback now option with Mike Vrabel that I would be just utterly thrilled about. Pat, we'll move on here to we'll just cover the other coaches that have already been fired before Black Monday. So we got obviously Josh McDaniels, Frank Reich, Brandon Staley, all canned. I don't expect any of them to stumble upon head coaching gigs this coaching cycle. I expect them all to fall back into coordinator roles. Do you disagree?
Well, no, but you know where Josh McDaniels is going to end up if Bill Belichick is still in New England.
Yeah, and honestly, fine. Like again,
he's clearly very good in that role. Like he was the one that was getting the most out of Mac Jones there for a brief amount of time. Yeah. And so blame the Raiders for that one too. But yeah, no, these guys are not head coaches. I mean, Brandon Staley, will probably go back and be a coordinator, I guess. Very young, that's the thing is. Yeah. And Frank Reich, you can see him taking some time off. Like who knows, where he's going to end up. But these are some interesting, like we said, Carolina's a dumpster fire. You've got a dumpster fire. You need to find a head coach that is committed to Bryce Young, because for now they're fucked. Like they need to, like if they kept their pick and had the number one pick, they could have done what the Cardinals did years ago and just dumped Josh Rosen for Kyler after 1 year. Like that would have been fine if you had to replace Caleb Williams instead of Bryce Young. But that's a really, really tough job. And part of me thinks that like you might need a veteran, like you might need a veteran offensive mind to come in there. But we've seen there's your clip. But we've seen now the trend where these young guys like Bobby Slowick, for example, in Houston, what he's done with C.J. Stroud under 1 year, like maybe it's like you kind of need a younger head coach and a younger quarterback to develop together. So I don't know what direction they're going to go in. It is by far the worst spot, but you may get the most power there.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you definitely have not the blankest slate to work with because you don't have like a first round draft pick this year, but you've got a team that has so little talent that you are definitely working to build that from the ground up. I don't know how attractive that Panthers coaching position is going to be. That's probably the most interesting one to me, like who's going to end up taking on that challenge. Because, look, it's easy to walk into L.A. and be like, oh, I've got Justin Herbert as my quarterback. And it's easy to walk into Las Vegas, which is such a big market, and has Mark Davis who's willing to spend.
Too, but...
Yeah, it's, those are easier spots to walk into, but still, Carolina.
So, like, looking here at the Panthers have already requested interviews with 9 candidates.
Oh my
and obviously, I'm sure they'll give Chris Tabor an interview just out of courtesy as the interim head coach. But 10 guys here. You got Brian Callahan in Cincinnati, the offensive coordinator. Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator in Tampa. Again, similar to Bobby Slowick, 1 year as an offensive coordinator. Bobby Slowick is another guy. Ben Johnson. Mike McDonald and Todd Monken in Baltimore, both coordinators. And now these are some of the interesting ones. Dan Quinn and Raheem Morris. I think Dan Quinn might be a good fit, but I think they may just need a really young, fresh face. Mm-hmm. Because I remember a few weeks ago I said like Jim Caldwell would have been a great guy there. But the more I've thought about it, like I think they need to go young. And I mean, maybe a guy like Bobby Slowick or Brian Callahan, who are both. Brian Callahan's 39, and Bobby Slowick might be even younger. Let's see. I looked at these guys' ages. You'd think I would fucking write them down at some point.
I think Slowick is younger.
He's 36. Right. Yeah, Bobby Slowick's 36. So, like, maybe
Copper.
They say, hey, this is my big chance.
Yeah.
And they may say, hey, this is a tough situation, but hey, this is probably my best shot to become a head coach. So they jump at it. Maybe that could be the case.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I do hope they get somebody that believes in Bryce Young, because there's always the chance that they get somebody that doesn't. And, after a year of the team being bad again, is like, see, I can't work with this guy. Let me go get my guy. And then you have the reset again. But whatever head coach this is does not have, I don't think, the luxury to burn a year to prove a point. So hopefully they get somebody that just believes in Bryce Young, because I think Bryce Young can still be a good quarterback in this league, even though we have not seen really anything in his rookie year. But it's very, very Trevor Lawrence-y, where the rookie year was just complete throwaway because of completely awful circumstances surrounding him. Pat, we'll touch on some of these other firings really quick. These are not head coaching firings, but there were a lot of other position coaches that got fired, and not even just position coaches, but a lot of other guys getting let go on Black Monday. So Panthers GM Scott Fitterer got let go. He obviously, Frank Reich got fired midseason. Fitterer got fired just now at the end of the season. To go along with some of the other head coaches that got fired, to make note of this, Raiders GM Dave Ziegler and Chargers GM Tom Telesco already got fired along with the head coaches mid-season. So the Panthers the only one kind of delaying the firing here a little bit. And for the other coaches that got fired, that being Ron Rivera and Arthur Smith, for now, like you mentioned, Pat, Commanders GM Martin Mayhew looks like he's sticking around, and Falcons GM Terry Fontenot has not been fired yet, but there has been a little bit of smoke there about how he's not as involved in the head coaching search as one might expect, and so that could be a hint that he is going to be gone as well.
Arthur Blank is another owner who kind of likes to hear himself talk. Like, I feel like in a world where Jerry Jones and Jim Irsay don't exist, like, we're talking about Arthur Blank as one of the more notorious owners in the league. So, maybe he'll want to start from scratch. He'll want to, he'll want to do what he can. And but yeah, I'd understand if they hung on to him. Like, I still think the foundation of what they have is there. I think just a better head coach and a better quarterback would work in Atlanta, at least, like we just said.
I mean, I don't personally understand firing the guy that got you all this offensive talent that Arthur Smith just doesn't know how to use. Like, he's nailed.
Exactly.
He's mostly nailed, at least the first round picks. I haven't dove into exactly how the rest of their rounds have panned out over the years, but Terry is at least not drafted a complete bust in the first round in quite a while, and now they have another 8th overall pick. I think it's like the 4th straight year that they've had exactly the 8th overall pick, and I'm sure he will probably nail it again this year. So I don't necessarily understand getting rid of him, but that is a little bit of where there's smoke, there's fire. If he's not involved in who they're going to hire at head coach, that is concerning. And then the only other GM, associated with a fired head coach currently is Titans GM Ran Carthon, which, as we mentioned, they fired Vrabel. Yeah. We believe because of disagreements, so Ran Carthon is probably sticking around. His job should be safe. And then for the position coaches, so the Jaguars, this is notable, basically cleaned house. I mean, they got rid of like 10 different guys. So we've got the list here. Defensive coordinator Mike Caldwell, D-line coach Brenson Buckner, passing game coordinator / cornerbacks coach Deshae Townsend, inside linebackers coach Tony Gilbert, safeties coach Cody Grimm, senior defensive assistant Bob Sutton, and defensive quality control coaches T. Mitchell and Sean Kalina. And then on the offensive side of the ball, running backs coach Bernie Parmalee and assistant O-line coach Todd Washington. This is as much of a clean house as you will ever see where the head coach stays in place.
Yeah. I mean, this could have been a situation where they said, hey, Doug, figure the fuck out, or we're canning you too. Like, basically reshape this coaching staff, or we're going to reshape the whole goddamn thing. Because we'll talk more about that. We've still got some more coaching stuff to talk about, but what a collapse. What a collapse that they had. And I don't think it should have cost Doug Peterson his job. I think Doug Peterson doesn't, for still, and also we'll talk about that fraud Trevor Lawrence, but from what he's been starting to get out of these guys compared to what Urban Meyer did, I think he's earned the right to, and this is a Super Bowl winning coach as well. Like, this is no slouch here. So I feel like he's definitely earned that. But yeah, it really just had to absolutely clean house here, which is, sometimes what you have to do. But I guess in other situations you don't have to, which I guess is a fair segue to go to the Raiders, which, like I talked about Mike Vrabel, but in my heart of hearts, the correct decision is to hire Antonio Pierce. You've got, a potential star, 45 years old, former star player. This is a guy who will, if he's not hired, he'll go and be a defensive coordinator somewhere else, and he'll be a head coach again someday. But Mark Davis cannot make the same mistake twice. He cannot do it. Back in a few years ago, Rich Bisaccia had the locker room. Derek Carr, Max Crosby, everybody said, we want Rich Bisaccia. And I get it. The guy was 61 years old. He had never been a head coach. That's probably for a reason. Like, I understood that. Not for getting Josh McDaniels, but there's really no excuse right now. There is no excuse. That locker room is behind Antonio Pierce, and that defense was fantastic, under Antonio Pierce in the second half of the season. And much like the Falcons, much like the Commanders, they need a quarterback. Like, they got 8 wins with Jimmy G, Aiden O'Connell, and godforsaken Brian Hoyer starting football games this year. to get 8 wins out of that team is very impressive for all intents and purposes. A lackluster group of players, but again, I think it's a reasonably, good situation for a candidate. You mentioned Vegas, the market's great, but they've got a really good defense, and it seems like Josh Jacobs is toast because Zamir White has looked really good. And you just got to fill the void there at quarterback, but and it's just scaring me seeing all these GM interviews that they're conducting, that they're not going to hang on to Champ Kelly, his name is. Yeah, I always forget his name, Champ Kelly, and then Antonio Pierce. Keep these guys, please. Like, please. We don't need to tear down this team again for a third time in 4 years, 5 years. They just do not need to do it. And they've got a guy who could coach that team for at least a decade. Mm-hmm. And if they let him go, but I don't put it past Mark Davis, because Mark Davis, like his father, is bombastic. He likes to make the flashy move. But they just cannot do this. Like, they cannot do this.
I'm torn on it, Pat. I really am, because Antonio Pierce has been very successful and obviously gotten a lot out of this Raiders team, but I understand the difficulty of committing to a guy who is a first-time head coach, and it's like, took over midseason, got a ton out of the players to incredible results. I mean, look, their last 4 games, they beat the Broncos, they lost at the Colts, who the Colts are almost a playoff team, but they beat the Chiefs on the road, they blew the doors off the Chargers that got Brandon Staley fired. But it's like, okay, what happens when we head into a new season and teams start to understand Antonio Pierce's coaching style, his strategy? It's like, you can be a really good motivator, but are you good enough at the sort of day-to-day, managing coordinators, that kind of thing? And I understand head coaches don't necessarily need to have their hands fully in offensive game plans, defensive game plans. Like, you can kind of delegate that how you wish up to your coordinators if you trust them. But I just don't. It's tough, especially this coaching cycle, like you mentioned, with so many great candidates out there, because it's like, would you rather, let's say they extend Pierce and he fails miserably because of the things I laid out, and that would suck. And it's like, would you rather fail with a big name like Jim Harbaugh or, Mike Vrabel?
I would rather fail with Antonio Pierce, because that's really, basically, they failed with John Gruden. They failed with Josh McDaniels. That's 2 big name coaches in a row right there that they failed with. So it's like, they don't need to keep doing, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again. And not to say they would fail with Jim Harbaugh. This is a guy who is shown to have success in the NFL level, not necessarily prolonged success, but success nonetheless, who is obviously an incredibly successful college coach. But I just think you pose an interesting situation. Like, I would much rather sit here 3 years from now and saying like, oh man, Antonio Pierce didn't really work out. I would rather say that than say, wow, Jim Harbaugh really did not work out. Because it's just going to set the franchise back again. You've got a decent foundation being built here in terms of player personnel-wise. You don't need to tear it all down again, because if a new head coach coming in, especially one like Jim Harbaugh, he's going to want his guys. And this is a franchise that is just in a wasteland. It's been in a wasteland for decades.
Yeah.
And they've shown signs of being on the cusp, and I feel like they're knocking on the door right now, where it's just like they're close to being able to break that door down and being a regular playoff contender, at the very least, a team that's contending for a playoff spot. And I even if it's Jim Harbaugh, like, I'm going to be upset. Even if it's Ben Johnson, I am going to be a little upset. I may be singing a very different tune a year from now if, all went great, especially with Ben Johnson as a younger guy. But it's just like, I think they have something right in front of their faces. And, he's going to need to bring in a new offensive coordinator, bring in a really good, can your interim guy, keep him as whatever he was, the run game coordinator or whatever, and bring in a really good offensive mind to develop whatever quarterback comes in here, whether it's a young quarterback or if it's a veteran type. But yeah, I can't. Just even the thought of it is just making me upset.
Yeah, I think if it's me, I would certainly prefer Antonio Pierce to any of the potential first-time guys like Ben Johnson, because like I feel like every coaching cycle it's the same thing. It's people assume that those guys are going to work out as head coaches, and it's like because we all have such goodwill towards them, seeing how well their offenses work, and they're this exciting new thing, and that they're just going to have it translate to be a head coach. We've seen time and time again that it just doesn't go like that.
Nathaniel Hackett.
Hello, Nathaniel Hackett. Hello, Brandon Staley. Hello, Arthur Smith. Like these guys who have excelled as coordinators. And Josh McDaniels, it just doesn't always translate to being a head coach. And so as much as
that was a mistake in the first place.
Yeah, well, they did. Yeah, that's a different situation. But like as much as we want it to work out for the Ben Johnsons and the Bobby Slowicks of the world, like it doesn't always. So if you have a guy, Antonio Pierce, who as small of a sample size as it is, has a proven track record a little bit of being a good head coach at least, I understand wanting to stick with him. If it's me, though, I would prefer Jim Harbaugh or Mike Vrabel over him just because of the heights that those guys have reached, and they've showed sustained success as a head coach, but that's just me.
Like I said about Mike Vrabel, too, is there's not really the red flags that Jim Harbaugh had. You know, basically Jim Harbaugh just basically lost the locker room in San Francisco within a few years after appearing in a Super Bowl. And obviously all the nonsense that's happened this year and all of his kind of wishy-washiness in terms of, am I going to go to the league or not? He's got some of the red flags, not nearly as much as fucking Josh McDaniels. But Vrabel does not have those red flags. So, like, if they were to hire Mike Vrabel, I'd be happy about it. But, like, I'm talking if they go in just some other direction and go with some wild-ass thing. But at the same time, I can't see Mark Davis moving on from Pierce unless he's getting a name. Because at the end of the day, Antonio Pierce is a name himself. Really good player. Super Bowl winning linebacker. One of the, cogs of a really good defense that, I forget who they beat in that Super Bowl. I think they were like 17-0 at that point or something. I'm not sure who they beat there, but sorry. But he was he's still a name. But yeah, I'm very, very concerned just because you never know what this clown is going to do. You never know what this clown is going to do. And that's more so what scares me. Is not like that, I'm scared they're going to go and get someone that's not Pierce. It's just more so who? Like, who are you going to go get that isn't Antonio Pierce?
Yeah, well, it'll certainly be an interesting one to watch with a Raiders fan here on our podcast table. This will be a fun one because you're either going to be extremely happy or extremely sad whenever they finally settle on
I'm not going to be sad. I'm going to be mad.
We're going to have rage.
I don't get sad about the Raiders. I get mad.
That's going to storm the Capitol. I mean, Allegiant Stadium.
I'm going to storm Caesar's Palace.
With no pants
I might do that anyway. Like,
I mean,
that's just an excuse to go to the buffet there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess that covers the coaching cycle for now. We will keep you posted. I mean, every news outlet will keep you posted on.
Well, we didn't talk about the Chargers, which is probably the most.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess because there hasn't really been a development on it. I mean, Staley's been fired, and so it's kind of just we know what the situation is with what a head coach would be stepping into. We know they're strapped for money. That's going to be the most interesting aspect of it.
But that sounds like a GM problem.
Exactly. It sounds like a GM problem. So whoever that ends up being, good luck.
But you've still got Justin Herbert. You've still got, granted, an aging Keenan Allen. You've got Mike Williams, who can hopefully stay healthy. And, good players on the defensive side. Derwin James, Joey Bosa, guys who just need to stay on the fucking field.
Yeah.
And you've got a clear need at running back, but this is a very good free agent running back class. You're going to probably be able to get a guy reasonably cheap who, who can come in and succeed at that position right away.
How about Melvin Gordon?
In terms of who the Chargers have been interviewing, basically the same guys. They gave our boy Giff Smith or Jiff Smith, whatever the fuck. I've never heard that name. Just a lot of the ordinary candidates that we'll talk about in a second. They also, the other guy they completed an interview was with Kellen Moore, which
that would be interesting.
That would be hilarious in my opinion. I think that would just be a terrible, terrible idea to give Kellen Moore the keys to that franchise right now. I just cannot see that. I don't know what you think.
I don't know. I don't think Kellen Moore showed enough, again, as an offensive coordinator to warrant a promotion. It feels like that's another sort of courtesy one where it's like, obviously he's not the interim head coach or anything, but it's still a guy.
But he's a guy that's interviewed in multiple places. Like, he was close in last year's cycle to getting one, but obviously he had a very down year. His stock took a big hit this year.
Yeah, so that one, that would be the place that, again, I would expect a Harbaugh to potentially end up. There's been Belichick to LA rumors. I'm not still totally convinced at this point that he's going to travel that far for his next job, but who knows? But yeah, Chargers, personnel-wise, might be one of the more attractive spots, but from cash-wise, definitely not an ideal situation. But, Pat, all those teams are hoping to eventually make the playoffs, obviously.
Yes.
Something that the teams we're going to talk about right now actually did. So we're going to get into our full playoff predictions. First, let's talk about the teams that actually filled those spots that we talked about last week, Pat. I think we went sort of 50-50-ish on our picks, which is just not a surprise. The AFC had 3 spots open as we headed into the final week, and those spots were claimed by the Texans, the Bills, and the Steelers. Pat, did either one of us say the Steelers were going to get in? I didn't think so.
I didn't, and I didn't think you did either.
No, I believe I had the Texans, the Jags, and the Bills, and I think you had the Jags, the Bills, and the Colts. That's what it was.
Correct.
So neither of us had the Steelers getting in. They ended up getting in by virtue
of
beating the Ravens, and I don't know. The most notable thing here from the AFC field, like we touched on a few minutes ago, is the Jags' just monumental collapse. And it felt, Pat, maybe this is just me, how I interpreted the situation. It felt like a little bit of a backdoor collapse because it was like, I know that they're playing like garbage, sort of, but I didn't expect them to choke away the playoff spot. That still felt...
completely miss the playoffs is wild. Like, after week 5, 6, this looked like a team that could possibly make the Super Bowl.
They were a team. They were one of my preseason picks to make my preseason Super Bowl prediction was Jags Eagles. So yikes, 1, but 2
the choke bowl.
I mean, this is now 2 consecutive years that my AFC pick to make the Super Bowl did not even make the playoffs because the year before I said the Broncos were going to make it. So whoever I pick next year, good luck. But yeah, the
congratulations to the Patriots.
No, yeah, the Jags missing the playoffs was a monumental collapse, and given the talent on their roster, I see why they had to clean house with basically every other coach that wasn't Doug Peterson, because it's a little bit inexcusable. I know they had injuries. Trevor Lawrence was extremely banged up down the stretch. They lost Christian Kirk a few games ago, but overall, they didn't suffer anything that should cause them to not win their division after the heights that they reached last year, making the playoffs, beating the Chargers in miraculous fashion. And now you look, they finished the season losing 5 of their last 6 games, the only win being over the Carolina Panthers, and it's something's got to give. They're heading into a very, very do or die year next season.
It's a make or break, obviously for Doug Peterson, but for Trevor Lawrence as well. It's time for that conversation. I don't think he's necessarily a complete bust, but it is very real right now that he may not live up to the number one. He may not be worthy of a number 1 pick. Sure, he could be a solid starting. He could be like a Kirk Cousins kind of guy for the next decade. But this is not the guy who was touted as the best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck.
No, I mean, this is a guy who, this was his 3rd season in the league. His first season is largely considered a wash because of Urban, but second season, this is where the disappointment comes from, because his second season, first year post Urban Meyer, he threw for 4,100 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. This year, on basically the same number of attempts, same number of completions, honestly similar completion percentage, 21 touchdowns and 14 interceptions. That interception total just jumped. The touchdown total fell, and it's alarming to see that kind of regression from a guy that you expect to only be seeing steps forward from, and you tailored your roster to allow that to be the case. I mean, he's got one of the better skill groups in the league, I think, with Evan Engram, Christian Kirk, Travis Etienne. Calvin Ridley wasn't what we wanted him to be, but still was at times reasonably productive receiver. This is going to be a do or die year. What I expect from the Jags, and, again, we'll get to actual playoff talk in a second after we get off our Jags soapbox. But what I expect from the Jags is they make a big splash with something on offense, something that will determine, Trevor, if you can't make it work with this guy, I don't know what to tell you. And that means they're either going to give up on somebody. I don't know what the Jags are seeing right now, whether they are going to commit to Trevor and be like, okay, this is still a coach issue, get rid of Doug. But if it doesn't work out next year, one of Doug or Trevor will probably be gone. I struggle so much to say that Trevor will be gone because who the fuck else are they going to get? But they'll make some kind of drastic move, right?
CJ beat hard.
Yes.
Yeah, and I understand that Trevor was really banged up with the multiple injuries. The ankle, the shoulder, the concussion, the whatever happened to him. I understand he was banged up, but Yeah, this was one of those more so like inexplicable collapses where it's just like, why is it happening? Like we'll talk about the Eagles. Like their collapse has been a bit more pronounced, but for them to go from that to missing the playoffs entirely is insane. It's just really insane. And I mean, you got to give a lot of credit to the Texans and the Colts even, who obviously also barely missed out on the playoffs, for just putting them in that position where they could just totally miss the playoffs. And
Yeah.
it's wild. I don't, even like 6 weeks ago, like if you talk about the Jags missing the playoffs, people say you're crazy.
Yeah. So, and it's important to note, like, Trevor had these injuries pile up, but even early in the year, like, he wasn't setting the world on fire with his numbers.
Oh, I know he wasn't.
Like, yeah, as a Trevor Lawrence fantasy owner, you're well aware. Like, his passing yard totals 241, 216, 279, 207. Only 4 touchdowns combined across those first 4 games. And it just was an ugly year. Somebody's going to have to get held accountable here eventually, because the Jags missing the playoffs is bad. And neither Trevor nor Doug are going to be gone before next season, but after next season, something drastic is going to happen. Whatever that is.
I don't have a really strong year, then all bets are off.
Like, I still think they'll go get him a big weapon, because I think they thought that's what Calvin Ridley was going to be. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Calvin Ridley's a free agent. I imagine they'll let him go, because he's just has not been. Let me confirm that really quick. But thought I saw him speculated as going elsewhere. Let me see. Because he's still on a deal that was with the Falcons. Okay, yeah, unrestricted free agent. He was not good enough for them to bring back. So I imagine they'll replace him maybe with a more alpha type of receiver, or they'll draft a great receiver and say, all right, let's get this thing rolling. And if it doesn't roll, we got to figure it out. But Pat, we'll talk about the teams that actually
draft
did.
Pick now.
Yeah, that's true. Teams that actually did make the playoffs: Texans, Bills, Steelers, and then in the NFC, the Bucks and the Packers made it. I believe I said the Bucks and the Seahawks would make it. You nailed it with Bucks and Packers. Packers ended up taking care of business there
by
against
taking the teams that
Chicago
control their destiny.
Bears. Yeah. Okay. So we'll get into our predictions game by game, and we actually disagree on a fair amount of these, which I think will be fun. So first one that we do not disagree on, and it was honestly the easiest pick of the entire first round for me: Bills versus Steelers. We both got the Bills. The Steelers they don't feel like they should be in the playoffs, and they may not even have TJ Watt in this game. It's not very hard for me.
Seems like they certainly won't.
Yeah, it's not.
Unless
it's not
he
very.
Really just goes sicko mode out there and plays
It's
with
not-
a grade 2 MCL sprain. Stop it.
It's not difficult for me to bet against Mason Rudolph in a playoff game. Even Mike Tomlin himself was like, "Yeah, we're going with Rudolph because we're sticking with the hot hand," and I'm just like, if that's your hot hand and that's your approach to the quarterback position, you're in
It's
a
the best
rough spot.
decision, though.
It is the best decision. It is, but it's
just
a testament
on
to
what kind of team they are.
Yeah, it's a testament to that they shouldn't probably be in the playoffs, and that they are a circumstantial, because the playoffs expanded to 7 teams sort of participant, which is very clear. The Buffalo Bills, meanwhile, are maybe the hottest team in the NFL. If they lose this game, it would be a complete shock.
Yeah, Sean McDermott would have to invoke something crazy in his post-game pep talk there, post-game wrap-up with the team. I mean, hey, after our boy said he loved him some Al-Qaeda, they have just taken off here. So Sean, take that as you may there, but I think, again, we'll talk about the Dolphins, but I think it's honestly more indicative of another team that collapsed.
Yeah. So, Pat, next we'll move on to the Chiefs and the Dolphins. Initially, I will say this: you had the Dolphins picked in this game, but we now both agree on the Chiefs. I settled on the Chiefs for this reason, and you could chime in the sec, Pat, because I've clearly swayed you.
Yes.
The Dolphins just have too many injuries. This game against the Bills really sapped any sort of hope I had of the Dolphins, winning a playoff game. Maybe not regardless of who they played. If they somehow pulled that one out and then faced not the Chiefs in the first round, maybe I would have picked them. But the Dolphins lost linebackers Andrew Van Ginkel and Jerome Baker and Cameron Good, all of whom I believe are placed on IR. They will not play in this first game. All at the same position. Like, their linebacker depth is cooked to the point where they signed Justin Houston and Bruce Irvin today, two linebackers with a combined age of 70. So, look, the experience is great, but that is just
really 70.
They're 34 and 36. Yeah,
Jesus.
Experience is great. Playoff experience is great, but those are not guys who are playing at the top of their game anymore. And I just think the Dolphins are too down bad positionally, injury wise, to overcome the Chiefs, at least in Kansas City. I know the Chiefs have their weaknesses as well. I initially, from a fully healthy personnel perspective, I would have picked the Dolphins, because the Chiefs
I don't think the Dolphins would have been in this position probably.
Yeah, that's true. Like the Chiefs have been sputtering as bad as any team other than the Philadelphia Eagles as far as who made the playoffs, but it's lining up too nicely for the Chiefs now in this first game in Kansas City.
The Dolphins are just going to really need to have like a nearly impeccable game offensively because they're going to, it seems like Raheem Mostert and Jalen Waddle will both be ready to go, but that defense is decimated, and it's still Patrick Mahomes. We've talked a lot about how underwhelming he's been, Travis Kelce's been, the whole offense has been. But at the end of the day, you're still dealing with Patrick Mahomes, who has been on the biggest stages before. And the Dolphins are going to have to score 70 points again like they did against Denver probably to win this game here. And that was my initial thought, was that like, oh, well, the Chiefs have been kind of fraudulent. But I just can't justify it with just how banged up they are.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where I'm super down on the Chiefs, and I fully expected to pick against the Chiefs in the first round, and then the team they drew. It reminds me of March Madness, actually, Pat, where it was like I wanted to pick Oral Roberts so bad, and then they drew Duke in the first round. I was like, never mind.
Yep.
Like it's not. It's like the dream is dead. The Chiefs, I think, are still going to end up winning a playoff game here. Below freezing temperatures in Kansas City against a banged up Dolphins team. They are going to move on, at least win one game. Texans versus Browns. Pat, this is not one I feel super duper strongly about, but I was torn on it. I ended up settling on the Houston Texans winning this game at home. I think this is very much a up in the air game. Obviously, the biggest star in this game is just the Browns defense as a whole, Myles Garrett leading it. That's going to be the X factor. Like if they just swallow up rookie quarterback CJ Stroud, the game's going to be over. But to me, I think CJ Stroud has shown enough this season, and this team has shown enough fight that they will be able to, win this game at home against Joe Flacco, who call it a dice roll, Pat. Flacco's falling apart eventually, and I don't know when it is, but for the sake of picking, a little different or just riding with my Texans, who I've been supporting for a lot of this season now, I'm going to say the fall off happens in Houston and that the Texans win this game. But you are going with the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, I'm going to say that fall off happens in the ultimate Joe Flacco revenge game in the divisional round against the Ravens. Like you said, the defense, and we've still seen the Texans. This is still a really young team, young quarterback, young coach, and we saw them lose a lot of games that they probably should have won. They lost to the Panthers, if I'm remembering correctly.
They did.
I think.
That is one of the Panthers' only two victories.
For example, they were realistically, they could have had this division on lock. It would have not even needed to come down to a Week 18 win. So I think a team with the Browns who have just played so smart with what they've dealt. Like I said, I think despite DeMeco Ryans doing what he did, I still think Kevin Stefanski is the coach of the year with what he's done with so many different quarterbacks. And like you said, the Joe Flacco insanity run will come to an end, but with how good David Njoku has been with him, and Jerome Ford's been really solid, and we know they're good in the trenches, I'm going to give the edge to what seems to be more of the complete veteran team rather than the Texans. But I do think that the Joe Flacco run will end in the Ravens game, which would still be just an awesome story. If it were to happen.
It's unfortunate because we did get the Texans at home versus the Browns this season, but it was one of the only games CJ Stroud missed, and it was Davis Mills playing the game. So the Browns ended up winning in Houston 36-22. Davis Mills and Case Keenum both played in that game. So we don't know how it would have played out with CJ Stroud playing, and we are going to get that answer this weekend, which I'm very excited for. So go Texans. Hopefully they can pull that one out. Then, Pat, we'll just we'll advance here to our projected AFC Championship game matchups and then who we think is going to win that and go on to the Super Bowl. You've got Ravens versus Browns in the AFC Championship game. I've got Ravens versus Bills. We both agree on one thing, and that is that the Ravens are going to win. I've stood by this for a couple weeks now, that it just... I know it's the boring pick, but I'm out thinking myself if I go with anybody other than the Baltimore Ravens. They look like the best team. I have no reason to believe they won't continue to be the best team. Would I be shocked if the Buffalo Bills kept riding this wave and finally made a Super Bowl in the one season people didn't think they would? No, I wouldn't be. That's why I have the Bills making it to this point and then falling to a superior team in the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, the Ravens just have everything going in their favor right now. Lamar has been so good, and we've seen it work with guys like Zay Flowers and Odell, and Isaiah Likely has been really good. That's another discussion we're gonna need to have next year if he's still there. Andrews and Isaiah Likely, and then obviously their running game. They were scoring with fucking Melvin Gordon and, other geriatrics. But like, you're right. It's like in March Madness, like making this outlandish bracket just for the sake of it and then being like, shit, I probably should have just gone chalk. So there's really no... I don't want to spoil anything for my Super Bowl pick, so we'll stop there.
Yeah, I'll be excited. Like, I'll be excited if there are upsets and if we're completely wrong. But it's like if we're trying to be informational here on this here podcast, on this here program, we got to go with what we actually think. And what I think is that the Ravens look like clearly the best team in the AFC, and they're going to make it. Okay, moving over to the NFC. Cowboys versus Packers. Pat, I'll let you start off with this one. You are going with the Dallas Cowboys. Why? And is it as simple as they've looked like one of the best teams in the NFC at times this year?
Yeah, I am going to go with that. And it's funny because I talked about all year how they were going to be the 5 seed before the Eagles just shit the bed. And they were going to lose a hilarious game against whoever won the NFC South, who at the time we thought would have been the Falcons. Another frauds. But yeah, Dak has played some of his best football. And Green Bay has been very impressive. Like, Green Bay has been one of the more impressive teams trending up to get into the playoffs there. But Dallas at home, even though Green Bay does tend to get the better of Dallas at home, I just think at the end of the day, they're still the better team. But huge props to what Jordan Love has done. Like that with Jordan Love next year, with Aaron Jones under control, with Jaden Reed, Dontavius Wicks, who's looked really good, and then Christian Watson. Like, that's going to be a really fun offense to watch, especially from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, and that's before we talk about bringing in any free agents or anything. Maybe they get in a fun new guy in there too,
or AJ Dillon again. But the way I see it is, I am gonna go boring here, and I do think Dallas will take care of business.
Well, astute observers will note that in the AFC, I went completely chalk. In the NFC, I am not going to do that. I am going to go with the Green Bay Packers here. I like the idea of this being Jordan Love's true coming out party after having quietly one of the best statistical seasons among all quarterbacks this year. Pat, I saw a note, this was the first time ever that the two quarterbacks who led the league in passing touchdowns will face each other in a playoff game, that being Dak Prescott and Jordan Love. And also, if you had told me, a couple weeks ago that Jordan Love was going to be one of the leaders in passing touchdowns, I would have smacked you in the face. So that's just a testament to how well
Christian
he's been playing.
Watson for much of the season, who was such a red zone threat. I saw something that was wild, that he was still like 6th or 7th in the league in red zone targets, despite like missing as much time, or not red zone, end zone targets specifically. Not just like, that's insane. But they've. Matt LaFleur is a really, really good coach. And, again, a team that lost a lot of games that they shouldn't have this year. Like, this could be a completely different story again. They could be the top wild card, realistically. They could have been. But a really fun story. And if you're a Packers fan, I think you've got to be really optimistic going forward after a point where you were probably pretty scared about how Jordan Love was looking at one point in the year. But now I can't see any reason to not be optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cowboys fans are having a little bit of PTSD right now. Pat, this was wild to me when I found this out and looked this up. But the Packers have won 4 in a row against the Cowboys in Dallas. 4 in a row. They have not lost on the road in their last 4 games. With Aaron Rodgers, yes. And they've also
that's the other thing.
Won 9 of their last 10 games. Yeah.
Jordan Love has never seen this kind of stage before. Packers still have Aaron Rodgers and they're in this position. Yeah, I may agree with you. But it's a different. It's hard to you don't want to throw that away. The whole like, oh, they've won the last 4, because that's significant. That's something. But it's just the fact that like they did it with their all-world future Hall of Fame, absolute lunatic asswipe quarterback.
No, it's 100% true. It's still it was a wild stat to me, with Aaron Rodgers, like knowing that these Cowboys teams have always been like competitive, that they just could not win at home against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. And if Jordan Love is going to continue this ascension to be a quarterback, maybe not as good as Aaron Rodgers, but Packers fans keep joking they've got a 3rd straight Hall of Famer. If he is going to keep being on that track, this is a game that he's probably going to win. And I think that he's got a good chance to. So I'm going with the Packers here. I think if there's any sort of big road upset in the first round, this will be it. And I'll be rooting for him because, fuck the Cowboys, right? Just in general, as a general rule.
Fair.
Yeah. As a general rule, I don't think you're wrong for picking them because they probably are the overall better team, but I don't know. I feel good about the Packers this week. And then we'll move on to the Lions versus the Rams. Pat, we are both in agreement in the Matthew Stafford homecoming that Matthew Stafford is going to have his homecoming and then go home. The Lions are going to win this game, hold down the fort against Matty Ice. Well, I guess that's Matt Ryan, but whatever. And
Matty Nice.
Matty Nice, yeah, he changed his jersey number to 69. It feels, other than feeling poetic, because it does. Like Stafford won his Super Bowl, and now he can come back to Detroit, and then the Lions are going to be like, all right, it's our time now, and you put him out. But beyond that, the Lions are just the better team right now. They're more well-rounded. The only thing, maybe not the only thing, but the Rams have a better quarterback. I think Stafford's still better than Goff, but the Lions, what they have constructed as a full team and how they've been playing, I got to go with them.
Yeah, and they're such a different team at home. They are such a good team at home in the dome there, and the other concern though is that your boy Dan Campbell put your boy Sam Laporta in a precarious situation, which poses the point of, like, I get records, but, like, you think, like, oh, what's the worst that can happen? That. Like,
it wasn't even, I don't even think it was about the record. I think Laporta had secured the, the reception for tight end record, rookie reception for tight ends record. He wasn't going to get the yards record. He needed like 260 to pass Mike Ditka or something like that. And yeah, they played the starters for way too long. I don't know what the deal was there. It sounds like it's not as... Lions pride. It sounds like it's not as big of a deal as we thought it was going to be. Campbell saying that Laporta at least has a chance to play this week, but the fact that it's even up in the air is a bit of malpractice. Look, the only thing the Lions had to play for in that game was, if you want to look at it this way, destroying any hope the Vikings had of making the playoffs, because the Vikings still had a remote chance of making the playoffs if they had beaten the Lions. Or that they thought they could move up to the 2 seed in the NFC, but that would have required both the Eagles losing to the Giants, which did happen, and the Cowboys losing to the Commanders. I understand it's the NFL. I understand anything can happen, and I understand through the first half of Dallas and Washington, it looked like Dallas maybe could have lost. It was tight for a little bit, but at a certain point, you got to weigh risk-reward, man. What are you playing all your starters for in a game that you're only playing for the slimmest of odds that you move up 1 seed in the standings, if that's what it was? And I know that that's just kind of what Dan Campbell's been about. He's a guy who's going to play his starters, and, he's not going to worry too much about the type of risk that can happen in any game. But it's like that game in particular got meaningless pretty fast. Like, why? And you almost had worst case scenario come to fruition.
And, no Sam Laporta there. You're losing a huge red zone threat, but they've still got a fantastic running game. That duo of Gibbs and Montgomery has been lethal. And you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, who has just been spectacular. And, we've seen Jared Goff be able to connect on some of these deep balls with guys like Khalif Raymond and, I don't even know if Jamison Williams is alive, if he's gambled recently, but
he's had some good games.
Even if Laporta's out, I think they'll make it work. I think they'll make it work. And again, just such a better team at home than on the road, which is why I'm going to. This was one of the easier ones for me as well.
It's funny. It was easy for me, but I also feel like this game is going to be really close. Like, I never really thought to pick the Rams, but I do think this is going to be a really good game. There was just no way I was going to pick against the Lions in this sort of season where it feels like they should be ascending and they need to win at least one playoff game to stay on that sort of track,
Sure.
And as far as the Laporta thing, it's more of a just what the fuck are we doing than how much it's going to impact them in this game. It'll certainly impact them if he's out, but I do think they have, like you said, more than enough to survive that. Bucks versus Eagles. Pat, this is another one I thought about that felt like, the Chiefs situation or the Oral Roberts Duke situation where it's like, okay, you've got a team that is reeling, absolutely reeling, like the Philadelphia Eagles are. But then they come up against a Buccaneers team that has scored a total of 22 points now the last 2 weeks against the Carolina Panthers and the New Orleans Saints. Credit to the Saints. Their defense isn't too bad, but that is not the kind of motor you want to see out of a team if you're going to pick them to beat the team that represented the NFC in the Super Bowl last year. But
that's not
ultimately
this team,
that is what we're both going to do, and we are both picking the Bucks over the Eagles in this game.
I mean, the Eagles, injuries aside, their secondary is dog shit. And what we know about Baker Mayfield is he loves to sling it. He loves to sling it to Mike Evans. He loves to sling it to Chris Godwin. I think that's going to be a huge play for the Bucs there. And just this Eagles team is just reeling. And now with Hurts being Hurts and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, it's like, who's going to be out there? And even if these guys are out there, it's just so hard for me to envision a team that is reeling this badly to somehow piece it back together for a playoff win, because it's like, they got to piece it together at some point. Like, if they would have pieced it together, they would have pieced it together and took the division.
Yeah.
Like, they could have easily, but I just cannot see them getting off this historic free fall. Like, people are calling for Nick Sirianni to be fired, and it's just like, this guy was in the Super Bowl. Like, you guys were in the Super Bowl last year, and we're very close to winning. Like, I don't agree with that, of course, but like, that is just how bad that this team has become over the last 6-8 weeks.
Yeah, it's been fascinating, and again, like, the Bucs have not been anything that have inspired confidence. Like, they needed to beat the Panthers just to secure a playoff spot, and the only thing they did in that game, Pat, was kick 3 field goals. So like, they are not firing on all cylinders either. It's more of just a case of they at least don't feel like a team who is like doom and gloom, completely falling apart. They feel like a team that could come out and play in front of a home crowd and take advantage of an Eagles defense that, much like their offense, has just not played very well lately. The Eagles have lost now 5 of their last 6 games. The only win coming against the Giants 2 weeks ago, and that was by 8 points. They even made that one interesting.
Oh yeah, they wanted to give that one away to Tommy marinara sauce, or whatever the fuck they call him.
So the Eagles are still favored in this game. I believe they're a 3-point Vegas favorite. And so it would not shock me to see them win this game and then, fall by the wayside, honestly get blown the fuck out in the following round, depending who they played. But for just argument's sake, I'm going to go with the Bucs and say that they get put out of their misery a little bit earlier to a team that it feels like it's always so easy to pick against the NFC South team. It's like, oh, these teams go on the road and they're playing a worse team. But you know what? No, I'm saying Baker Mayfield is going to hold this one down and take out the Eagles and put them and their fans out of their misery for the season. But I agree with you. Sirianni, firing him sounds fucking insane.
A bit rash.
Just a bit rash. And then, Pat, our NFC Championship game matchups. We both agree on the matchup and result. 49ers versus Lions, and the 49ers come out on top. Look, yeah, like we said, super bold to pick the 49ers to make the Super Bowl, right? They're the best team in the NFC. We cannot, in good conscience, pick another team unless it was just to sort of make a hot take. I would love to see the Lions get there. Absolutely love it. But the 49ers are on a different level.
And we talked about how the Lions are a completely different offensive team on the road. I cannot see them against the 49ers somehow pulling one out on the road. I have them pulling one out on the road against Cowboys to get to the NFC Championship game, but I just don't think that's going to happen with the 49ers, despite their quarterback being is also on fraud watch. But I don't think that's going to matter because they are just so well coached, so well rounded. The weapons they have offensively, hopefully, it seems Christian McCaffrey should be fine in 2 weeks by then for the divisional round. So it's just almost impossible to pick against the 49ers through the NFC. Wink.
Yeah. So, look, our Super Bowl matchups are obviously the same, 49ers versus Ravens, but we do differ here. I have the 49ers getting their lick back after, getting smacked around by the Ravens here in the regular season. I just think Brock Purdy came out, and look, I know I probably talked down Brock Purdy a little bit after that game just to say that he is a guy who is limited as a quarterback, and I still believe that. But I also believe that he is a very, very dedicated, hardworking quarterback, and I think he is going to learn from what was, aside from the Ravens' defense being maniacs, his worst game as a quarterback. Like, he admitted he did not come out ready. Yeah, he admitted that he did not come out, in the right mindset in that game, and that the turnovers just kind of piled up. As much as I don't believe Brock Purdy is the next Drew Brees and going to ascend to like top 5 status like some people do, I also don't believe Brock Purdy is the type of quarterback that is ever going to bottom out. I think he is a good quarterback. I think they are going to take what they learned from that game and through sheer will, somehow they are going to piece it together because their roster is just as talented as the Ravens is. They have better offensive skill players certain. And so it's just a matter of scheming it up in ways that, Brock Purdy, Pat, I remember in that game, every time he threw a screen pass, the Ravens were all the fuck over it. I think Brock Purdy has it in his wheelhouse to throw the ball downfield better than like a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo did. He's not just a screen pass kind of guy. So I think they will maximize whatever happened in that game and figure out a better way to have that offense move against the Ravens. I just think it's a case of Ravens won the last time. I got the Niners this time. And I think the Niners also are super due for a Super Bowl. They are very much due.
And in this hypothetical situation, the X factor is Brock Purdy. If the 49ers will win or lose behind Brock Purdy. Yeah. And I mean, they got whooped. Like, it wasn't just like it was a great game and the Ravens just edged them out. No. Like, Purdy was horrific, and they got demolished. And I'm not saying that's going to happen again. I don't think it's going to happen again. But you're going to have to – Purdy's going to have to throw the ball down the field. They're going to have to challenge the expectation that the Ravens have for him. And if they can kind of break through that game plan, then you may be right. They will be at least in a position to win the game. But I'm going to go with the Ravens here. Just a really it's hard to describe because they're like very fundamentally sound as well, but they've got the flair. Not to say the 49ers aren't exciting, but like when you think of the 49ers, you think of like the big fundamental, like just a really well coached, like a system.
Unless it's one of those games where George Kittle decides to throw everyone in front of him to the sideline. But yeah, I understand what you mean.
And the Ravens just, they feel like they're that good, but with a little bit more fun to it. And also for the sake of being a little different, so we don't, come here and be rooting for the same thing every week. So I'll go with the Ravens to do it again against them, and in the Harbaugh Bowl again, without one of the Harbaughs. Hopefully the power stays on. Where are they? Where's the Super Bowl this year? Is it in Vegas?
Maybe. I have no idea where the Super Bowl is. Why do I want to say Arizona? Or was that like last year? Last year was in, I think last year.
It is Las Vegas, yep.
It's Vegas, okay.
It was in L.A. last year, I think.
Okay. So, yeah, we differ on who's going to win the Super Bowl, but we do not differ on who's going to be in it. Pat, because we have these picks, I very much look forward to the eventual Cowboys-Bills Super Bowl that we're going to get because we're not going to be right. There's no way.
Steelers, Bucks.
Oh, my. Bucks, Browns, Baker Mayfield revenge game.
Goodell would be just on the phone with everyone. He'd be on DEFCON 5, man. That guy would be on suicide watch.
He would be in shambles. But there you have our playoff predictions. I think they're pretty solid. Obviously, there are picks, so they're going to be flawless and perfect, and I'm going to believe that they're great. But we will see how they play out after this week. I'm excited for the playoffs to actually get underway. Pat, we'll get into some viewer questions real quick, some impromptu viewer questions because I didn't write them down because we had so much other shit going on.
We had time for at least one.
Yeah, look, I'm going through our questions. One of them is just Arthur Smith. That's not a question. But yes, no,
yeah.
I don't know. Let's see here. If Bill Belichick retires from football, do you think he could revolutionize shuffleboard? Rude. He's old, but that's not all he's good for.
Yo, that would be wild, man.
Let's see. This question, okay. I'm not sure where this came from, but heard through the grapevine the Raiders might hire Kellen Moore as the Raiders' new offensive or head coach. Thoughts on Pat? What are your thoughts on Kellen Moore as Raiders?
As I put in our I don't know if it's still in our show sheet, but at one point it said in our show sheet that I would jump off the Aragoni Bridge in Middletown, Connecticut, if they didn't hire Antonio Pierce. My tune has changed a little bit, but that is my answer to you. If they get godforsaken Kellen Moore. If if we're talking last year Kellen Moore at this time, sure. But I'm talking 2023, 2024, right now Kellen Moore? No, please no.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What is the potential path for the Steelers against the Bills without Watt in the snow? Which did make me look up. This is expected to be a snow game. So Pat, how do the Steelers win this game if they're going to win it in the snow against the Bills? Najee Harris has to run for 300 yards. I think is really
Mason
all.
Rudolph's going to need to put on his red nose and somehow lead Santa in the gang there. There must have been some magic in that old silk hat he found. That's Frosty. That's not even Rudolph. I'm bringing up different Christmas carols here, but
man.
We've seen Rudolph in the snow get it done before.
That's true.
There is no path.
The Steelers, if the Steelers don't get mollywopped by 20 points, it will be a shock among shocks. Let's see. We'll fit one more in here. Trying to find a good question. You guys are terrible. Okay, this is a good one, Pat. Is it too early to do mock drafts? Fantasy football question for you.
Yes. I wouldn't do mock drafts because then you're just going to be thinking about it. But it's not too early to start thinking about rankings type of thing. Who do you think is going to be ranked in certain places? Who do you like? But there's also so many moving pieces. The free agent running back market alone is insane. We don't know where these guys are going to be. There's going to be guys in different situations. So once the free agents and the draft go, sure. But right now, yeah, I will say it's a little early.
I've talked before about how I do think it's important to keep, this season fresh in your mind in relation to creating like your rankings and your opinions for next season, because you forget so much stuff, like coaching firings end up just overwriting whatever happened the previous season in your brain. It's just, there's so much information to keep track of that inevitably you will forget some of it. So I think if you do put together just a preliminary list of guys you think you like and guys who, again, I've talked about this too, their situations are unlikely to change much from this season to next, and you have those guys kind of earmarked as the safe players, and then we figure it out after the fact. Yeah, you can still do that, but doing a full mock is tough. I think I wait at least until the NFL draft plays out so that I could see, because rookies have become such a staple
this past year.
I mean, I just like doing them to see where guys are sort of sitting in the rankings. But yeah, at least until after the NFL draft, because rookie receivers have become the new hot thing. Rookie running backs, even if they're not selected super early, like you want to know where those guys go and who's going to have a good opportunity. So is it too early for you to actually get anything out of it? Probably. But if you're just a psychopath, go ahead.
Sure, want to have some fun? Why the fuck not? You could be doing worse things. You could be doing like crack or something. So,
exactly.
Yeah,
you could just be doing so much crack. All right, Pat. We're not doing crack here, I don't think. But anything left to say before we sign off here, before the first playoff week of the 2023-24 NFL season?
But my ass did have a crack in it, so I had to get a new one. Hit the end button.
I have to pee. Folks, for Pat Gustafson, I'm Brandon Carney. We'll see you guys next week.
Oh, go fuck myself.